In this podcast, I want to talk about the concept of unity. What is unity? I also want to investigate the relationship between oneness and the concept of unity. Because the fact that we describe something as one doesn't mean that it has only one type of behavior. No, you can have something that has an infinite degree of freedom, meaning it can display an infinity of behaviors, different behaviors, and yet all of that comes from a single place, a single representation. For instance, if you take the set of all natural numbers, it's literally just a regeneration of one. You just keep adding one infinitely often, and you get an infinity of numbers. So the idea of oneness really is related to the perception of unity, or the concept of unity. That's really what it is. Now, when most people think of what a human being really is, and that why a human being is self-aware and why a human being lives in the type of reality that we do, well, if you really think about it, really give it a thought, you will come to understand that the reason why a human being has become self-aware is so that a human being can act as an agent for the reconciliation of unity. Because it is within a human being that the world makes sense. It's within human self-awareness or human consciousness that things make sense. And the very concept of things making sense requires unity. When you can explain things as part of a continuum, then you are inculcating unity, you are recognizing unity. It's not a mystery that in physics, scientists have been looking for a theory of everything. That's unity. Physicists are working to reconcile all the forces of nature, all the physical forces of nature. That's unity. And the perception of unity, or the chase for unity, is not really for an external universe that is out there. It is really a reconciliation of unity within the self as the self. And this is the primary scourge of self-consciousness. Everything has its upside and downside. The downside of self-awareness is simply that fragmentation. That is the downside of self-awareness. Because self-awareness is supposed to be a representation of united type of experience, but this sense of united experience is built up from a multiplication of nerve impulses sending stimuluses to the brain. The brain is the one performing the trick of putting everything together, making it look like one. But that's exactly what it is. The brain is where the reconciliation takes place. Not the thalamus in the brain brings everything together, orchestrates it and modulates it in such a way that everything can fit seamlessly into an experience that looks very holistic. Because the underlying nature of reality itself is oneness. Now, intelligence is classified as your ability to be able to perceive that oneness. That means that you need to be able to synchronize with the idea of that oneness, to be able to trace it and track it and see how it goes. And that is what we call knowledge, at least from the human point of view. Now, this is very important, because when we talk about natal chart synthesis, what is the natal chart? Natal chart is a pictorial representation. It's a horoscope. It's the snapshot of what the solar system looks like from the vantage point of the Earth, as at the moment when a person is born. And these individual functional lights, which we call planets, as they are represented in different parts of the sky, they all seem isolated, right? The natal chart is the underlying representation that shows the unity connecting all these things into one underlying representation. That's why the natal chart is a circle, not a square or a triangle. And so the point of every human life is the reconciliation of unity, and that unity is a narrative. Remember, fragmentation occurs when you cannot reconcile things together. You don't know how one concept in your head fits into another concept in your head. But that fragmentation is not out there in the world. It's within you, because it is within you that the lack of understanding occurs. And that lack of understanding, that lack of the ability to reconcile these so-called varying concepts, it shows up as a behavioral expression within your personality. Those behavioral expressions are responsible for what you eventually call your fate or your destiny or whatever it is you want to call it. And that is why in natal chart synthesis, what we do is we reconcile every single point in the natal chart into one underlying one underlying story, one underlying narrative, just the way that it's supposed to be. And that story becomes your story. It becomes your narrative, as intimate and as personal as your name or your identity, your sense of self. In a certain sense, they are the same thing. It shows where you fit into in the grand scheme that is the total reconciliation of unity, that we call a universe. It shows where you fit in. And if you know how to read it properly, you will see that everyone has a role to play. We are not randomly thrust into this universe. Everyone comes in here occupying a role, built for a particular role, designed and programmed to chase a particular story. And how well we do is what we eventually call our life, our experience of living. So in a sense, you have to see that reality is a projection of the disturbance which exists in unity. Since unity is sacrosanct and unimpairable, this disturbance really is apparent. It doesn't really exist because it cannot exist. Humanity is the restoration of unity, and evil is the opposition to this inclination. As such, good and evil exist as states of awareness regarding the underlying nature of unity. You see that disunity is a lack of understanding, and the lack of understanding is taking place within the mind. In a real sense, self-awareness itself is a recognition of the real impossibility of disunity. Because self-awareness is the linkage that exists between things, concepts. The story that you can tell relating one thing to another. That story is always very intimate to you. These things will otherwise appear impossible. For instance, if you see a plate and a cup, if you have no concept what food is, or that human beings actually sit down at the table to eat, you have no idea how to link the concept of a plate with the concept of a cup. You don't know anything about drinking. You're not familiar with any of these concepts, or sitting down at a table to eat. Then these things will remain very strange to you. But the strangeness does not exist in reality. It exists within the individual who does not understand this. And that strangeness, that lack of understanding, it shows up as different parts of the self that are not connected together. That is the very definition of conflict. And because the individual does not understand this conflict shows up as a behavioral expression somewhere in their reality. The task of self-awareness, therefore, is to realize absolute unity and oneness of perception and existence. That's really what it is. And that's why a human being became self-aware. We are like gardeners in a garden, but it's not a physical garden. It's a conceptual garden. And our role is to connect everything in that garden together, to link it all together. And that is why the sixes are the very important things. Why? Because the six is a connection. Six is a connection. It is the connecting factor in everything. Some people don't like this, but they talk about the tetragrammaton, the ineffable name of God, often written as a four-letter word that is somewhat unpronounceable. But what do you think it's talking about? It's talking about how the 6 is the root to the reconciliation of oneness. In a sense, it's not really a name. It's a phenomenon. It's the phenomenon. What I have given a nomenclature as organized complexity. That's really what it is. Just think about it very carefully. It's the root to oneness, the prescription for oneness. That's what organized complexity really is. And that is the approach that I bring into natal chart synthesis. It's, being able to see the oneness, the underlying representation, the unity. Now, the opposite of this is evil, because it is born of ignorance. Evil breeds conflict. It externalizes that conflict and tries to make that conflict a permanent representation within reality, even though this can never be. It's impossible. And so, like a rubber band that is pulled excessively, there's always a correction inherent within all of that process, and that correction is designed to restore unity, both on an individual basis or on a mass, on the groups or masses of people. The very idea of dividing human beings into different races is an example of disunity. It's an example of fragmentation. It came from a mind that is diseased, because such a thing does not exist. But when a human being began to tell themselves that type of story, to bring in separation and division for the purposes of, for other more insidious problems, that is to reduce the collective of humanity into something of a much lower representation, to fragment it all so that the individual pieces that are thus established can now be controlled insidiously. But at the end of the day, what that process will succeed or has succeeded in doing is they have brought about, or they are going to bring about, unity just from the other side. Because you cannot, it's impossible. Disunity technically is impossible. So if you use disunity as a weapon or as a tool to try to foment disunity and to create all these things, what will eventually happen is that corrections will be applied in proportion to all these efforts, and they will be applied in such a way that the perpetrators would have brought about mass unity, but just from the other side. There will be consequences, obviously, but the consequences are going to be for the perpetrators. They're not going to be for the underlying representation itself, which is unchangeable. So all of it is going to end in terms of, and the entire process has already started, and it's going to kick into a major acceleration next year when Pluto goes into Aquarius. March 23rd, 2023. Obviously, the process will have begun in earnest prior to that, but that's exactly what it is, and the world will never be the same again. So that's really what it is, that we're dealing with something that is, everyone on earth is about to be taught a major lesson. So everybody, open up your eyes, open up your ears, especially open up your eyes, because you're about to see something that you just didn't think was possible. But the idea is that there has been no other possibility. It's just that we couldn't see that. This whole idea of creating a world where you have black, you have white, then you have every shade in between, and then you have different economic policies for every, based on skin color. It's madness, it's insanity, and everyone has been pushed to the brink of insanity with this type of behavior. And then you have a world system that tries to maintain this as an operational policy. It's unworkable. It's impossible. And if you think that the pressures on these systems have been tough till now, just wait till next year, and then you're going to freak out. Now, as pertaining the natal chart in terms of the horoscope or the zodiac, how does this how's the sense of unity represented within this? Well, as I've mentioned in my training programs, I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into what I teach. There are 3 major quadrants within a horoscope. You can, of course, the horoscope is from Aries to Pisces and then all the way back, because it's a helix, it's an infinite helix. So, but if you look at the 12 segments that exist as Aries to Pisces, you can divide those 12 segments into 3 major quadrants. Each quadrant contains 4 signs, and the first quadrant is Aries to the sign of Cancer. The second quadrant is from Leo to the sign of Scorpio, and the third quadrant is from Sagittarius to the sign of Pisces. Now, what's going on here? You can clearly see that these quadrants start as fire signs and ultimately evolve into water signs. Now, the fire signs are inspiration, the spark of inspiration that is the birth of existence itself, the birth of self-awareness. So the fire signs are realizations. And the realization, what typifies the realization is that it is the birth of a particular type of desire. The desire to be. The desire to see the self as represented within a reality system. This is what you learn with me. And the sign of Cancer is the emotive self. The water signs are the emotive selves. And you can see that since the development starts from a fire sign and ends, the development of a quadrant, that is, starts as a fire sign and ends as a water sign. Then what is really being seen by the 12 segmented nature of the zodiac is that each quadrant is typified by the development of the emotive self, because the emotive self is the product or the end product of that developmental process. So the first emotive self is the sign of Cancer, the second emotive self is the sign of Scorpio, and the third emotive self is in the sign of Pisces. But the reason why these emotive selves are outcomes, developmental outcomes in themselves, is because they are the 3 different representations of unity. Now, in the sign of Cancer, unity is represented by the child and its mother, the unification that occurs between the child and its mother, and that is the first step in the development of the ego. Now, you only get these in my training programs. You don't hear these anywhere in the world. There is not a single astrology training program or astrology textbook anywhere in the world that tells you exactly what I'm telling you now. I developed these not from astrology. I developed them from something far deeper than astrology. And that's what you find in my book, The 5 Principles of Organized Complexity. And it is built around the 6s of unity. The 6, And underlying that is the distribution of prime numbers. Now you begin to wonder, what exactly have prime numbers have to do with astrological thinking? Well, do you know that the Great Pyramid of Giza has contained within it different types of prime numbers? And the entire map of the entire construction of monuments on the plains of Giza are all astrological. So that's the wrong question, if you ask me. If you don't know the relationship between prime numbers, their distribution, and astrology, then you haven't really begun to understand astrology. And I don't mean this as a disrespect to all the, many astrologers out there who've been doing this for many years. There is always an opportunity for learning, and we must not be afraid to actually learn this. If that is where truth resides, then who cares? Now, the sign of Scorpio is the next iteration of this sense of unity, which is the unification with another. This time a stranger. The first was with mother, the second is with a stranger. And in Pisces, the unification is with everybody. And that's why Pisces contains the strongest or the deepest level of unification, because it's a unification with what we will term God, divinity. But that's really everybody, every soul. That's really what it is. So most people are not really aware that the what you call religion every form of religion that makes any sense, or let me say not makes any sense, because they don't make sense, but every religious impulse in a human being is that tries to establish a relationship between mankind and humankind and God is really talking about the nature of unity. Human beings understanding a relationship with unity. And if you understand, unity, like I said in the very beginning, unity doesn't mean that there's only one thing per se. Unity means that everything always fits together in such a way that you cannot really define individual parts of that thing. It always exists as a whole. Even if there are infinitely many representations, but they are all always looked upon as a single holistic structure. Impossible to divide. That's really what it is. And the entire, for instance, people who have a lot of placements in the water signs, their life pattern revolves around their understanding of this concept of unity as related to that particular emotive sign that they have majority representations in. If you'd like to know more, come join my classes. They're online, meaning they're live if you want, or you can go for the recorded versions whereby you get private access to the recorded online versions, and you can stream them at your own convenience and learn more. I go into extreme details in the teaching. I mean, the price is the same whether you want to learn as a recorded version or as a live version. The price is, because I do enjoy teaching these things, so the price is the same for the live Zoom version, or for if you prefer to listen to the recorded lectures on your commute or as part of doing other things. There are some people who they can't sit still and listen to a lecture. They have to be doing something else. So there are different formats available, whichever you want. But the most important thing is that by the time you are done with the sessions, there are 6 of them. By the time you're done with the sessions, you won't be the same person. There's just something would have just changed within you, and that's the result of a new type of awareness, an aspect of your being that has suddenly become aware of things that it didn't know before. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to want to take a look at your natal chart once again, if you've been very conversant with it. Because under the new paradigms and the new frameworks that you're going to be learning, you are going to want to rethink everything that you think that you have already known. And this also applies to those who've been studying astrology to an advanced level already. Because this program was not developed from astrology. I often tell people that I'm not an astrologer. I didn't set out to become an astrologer. I have applied wisdoms from a science which I literally invented, and I have applied it to astrology. Science is not the actual word, because the thing about science in today's reality is that science is really a process of division. It's a process of breaking things down into smaller individual sections. It's a process of dividing things up into smaller and smaller sections so that they can be better studied and controlled. But the opposite is what I'm doing. I'm actually piecing together the big picture from all the little concepts and fragments here and there. I'm reassembling something that was once known many, 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 many thousand years ago. Okay? So, if you've enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe, put this on repeat, share it with your friends. If you want natal readings, get in touch. It's just an email or a WhatsApp message. Don't be shy. Don't let yourself block you. All the details of the description of how to register for my courses are in the description of the video, of the podcast itself. Just take a look. If you have any questions, simply send a message through my WhatsApp or through the email. It's all in the video description. I do 3 pro bono natal readings every month. I still have space for at least 2 readings for in the month of December. So hurry up and get in touch and see if you can take the 2 slots. But once the 2 slots are exhausted, everybody else is going to have to pay. And if you've been listening to my videos and all that, I don't really place importance on the value that is paid. Some people pay $200 for a reading. Some people pay $1,000. It's not about the value of the money, it's what it means to you. And for something that is you consider to be important, it has to mean something to you. That's the first step. It has to mean something to you. If your life, or the narrative of your life, of the underlying representation of your own understanding doesn't mean much to you, then who is it supposed to mean much to? Me? Of course not. That's the whole point. Some people they say, oh, I want to get a reading, but I want a free reading. You can afford to pay significantly, but you don't want to, because you want to get it for free. Then it doesn't mean anything to you. So what exactly are you hoping to derive from it? Deception is not made for self, because the deception of self is it's the sin, like it's the primary sin. What you call a sin is not, sin is a biblical term, but it doesn't really mean anything per se, because what it really is a dysfunctionality applied to the self. It's like taking a knife and stabbing your own heart with it. How many people do that? Of course not. But that's exactly what you do when you tell a lie against yourself, when you promote a falsehood regarding your own nature. See? And then when you do these kind of things, you set yourself up to with the consequences of this type of behavior. So it is always very good, because honesty, what honesty does is it allows us to see ourselves very clearly and very carefully. And that is very important, because if we can see ourselves extremely clearly, then we can see others. And if you've experienced problems in life, you will realize that the most difficult part of every problem is to understand the nature of that problem. You cannot cure what you don't understand. You cannot solve a problem you don't understand. In fact, there is a very good sense wherein if you can understand the problem completely, that is the solution.